Let's talk about the lasso tools in Photoshop. In your toolbar, the lasso tools are going to be close to the top. And if you do not have the full toolbar, you're going to see just the lasso tool and the Polygon lasso tool. And if you're missing all three lasso tools, go down to the ... at the bottom of the toolbar, click and hold on those dots, choose Edit Toolbar. If you see any tools that are on the right-hand side under the extra tool categories, click the Restore Defaults button and go ahead and get all your tools into your toolbar for use. If not, you have to keep clicking on that dot to call them up. And so there's all my lasso tools, and we're going to run through these. Now you'll notice the shortcut for the lasso tool is the letter L. So how does it know which lasso tool to use when you click on the letter L? Well, if you do Shift L, you are going to be able to cycle through your lasso tool, your Polygon lasso tool, and your magnetic lasso tool, which is the three we're going to show you right now. I'm going to start off with a lasso tool. And the lasso tool is probably one of the simplest tools in terms of selection, but it's also the tool that Photoshop is not going to offer you any help on, which means it's all you when you're using a lasso tool. There's no special things that Photoshop steps in and does. When we're using any of the lasso tools here, I just want to zoom in and show you some of the things that we're going to run through on each one of the lasso tools. First of all, we have our different sections here, which are going to be create a new selection, add to an existing, take away from, or intersect with a selection. Always make sure we start off with a new selection here. In terms of feathering, always set your feather at 0. And feathering is the softness that you make the selection. If you go in and you set a number here with your selection, your entire selection will be feathered that much. The problem with setting something other than 0 here is that if you feather it too much, you can't unfeather it. You have to undo your selection completely and start all over again. When you set your feather at 0, you can always feather this infinitely, but you can never unfeather when you begin with a number set in here. So don't set that number to anything other than 0. Anti-aliasing is going to produce a smoothing effect, and this is something we definitely want to have on so that we don't get the really jagged stair-step type of selection that makes it look like a 8-bit video game back from the early 80s with our selection. So just a quick overview of what goes on with the selection tools. One thing that's common that people will notice is that their selection tools, their lasso tools, will end up being this little plus here. This is what's called a precise cursor. And the precise cursor is something you can set in your preferences, but it may be something that shows up inexplicably. One of the reasons why this may show up, you have your caps lock key turned on. Try that. Caps lock turned on, you get your precise cursor. Caps lock turned off, and you see just the lasso tool. Now you can use the precise cursor. There's nothing wrong with that. That little point right there is where you begin to draw your selection. So if you like that, not a problem. If not, just take off your caps lock key. Now working with selections here, the whole point of having a selection is so that we can put a selection around an area that we would like to manipulate. If I wanted to go in and I wanted to change the color of the stem, I would want to go in here and put a selection around the stem, like so. Obviously, this is not a great selection. But then if I wanted to change the color, a selection is going to isolate everything around that area. Anything inside the selection is what I can manipulate. Anything outside the selection is what is going to be left untouched. We use selections to isolate for color adjustment. We use selections so that we can remove the background, or we could select something like the apple here and bring it into another file without having to go in and use the eraser tool. So with selections here, some of the basic things about selections, very simple. I'm just going to do a quick selection around this as well. I know it's not an awesome selection. Don't worry, we're going to get to awesome selections. Here's what we need to understand about selections. When you have an active selection here, I see these marching ants going all the way around. Now this is what's called the marching ants. This is the untechnical term, but that's what we call it, is the marching ants. We see those things going around there. And those marching ants show me that something is selected. Now selections can get kind of tricky because when we zoom in, we may not know what is and isn't selected. So here's how we tell what is and isn't selected. If your selection tool that you're using looks normal, which it does now, you are outside your selection, meaning nothing can happen out here because we are not inside the selection. Once you move inside the selection, you'll notice that we get this white cursor with the little icon in the lower corner. That tells me that we are inside the selection. So anything that I do is only going to happen inside the selection. So say I change the color of this, you'll notice that that selection is very clear. It only happens inside the selection. This is the exact same thing you would do if you're painting something. You use tape to tape off the area so you only get that area that you want. You don't want to manipulate outside the area, you just want to manipulate inside the area. So with these lasso tools, the Polygon or the normal lasso tool here is best for small little areas. It is not great for going in and selecting large areas for this. If I wanted to do small little areas, this would be great for that. One thing with the normal lasso tool is that when you begin to select something, if you let go while you're in the middle of doing this, you will go ahead and close your selection. And once we close our selection here, I can't go back in and open the selection and begin very easily adding to this selection. And once we go ahead and have our selection, if we click outside the selection, the tool thinks we're starting all over with a selection and we lose our selection. And this is something that's very common, and we're going to show you how we can get around that as well. So the lasso tool probably isn't the best thing to go ahead and use for this, but the Polygon lasso tool can be. And the Polygon lasso tool up here in your options bar is going to have the same settings as the lasso tool does. But the difference is when we're drawing the Polygon lasso tool, we don't have to worry about letting go of the mouse or the trackpad while we're working. So I'm going to zoom in really big here. And the reason why I zoom in really big is because I need to see the edge between my object and the background, whatever I'm trying to select. If you work with it at this size, wanting to see the entire picture, the problem is that you're not going to get a very accurate selection along that edge. You want a selection so you can actually see where that edge is. Now, when you zoom in really big here, it's hard to see where that edge is, and this is the whole point of zooming in large. You want to see exactly where your selection is going to be, okay? When you have it zoomed out small, you could be out here, you could be in here, but we need to be right at the edge. In some cases, the edge of your image and the edge of the background may be very hard to discern. But the whole point of putting a selection around this is that you need to go ahead, and your best guess is to get that selection right there at the edge. Now I'm going to start with my selection around here, and you'll notice that my image is very big on the screen. And so in order to move this all around while I'm working on this, first of all, I need to zoom in big. No, I can't see the entire object. So I need to be able to work with my selection here and also move my image around. Now, if I'm working with my selection tools, I can't go back and select any other tool in the toolbar, because if I do, I'm going to complete my selection and then I have to start over. But I do need to move this around as I'm working on this so I can be able to go through and select this. So we're going to go in and introduce the space bar. And the space bar is going to give us the hand tool, okay? Now you'll notice in my toolbar, when I hold down the space bar, I get the hand tool, but it doesn't actually select the hand tool in the toolbar, okay? I can't go and select the hand tool because, I'll show you. If I begin to do my selection along here, and I run out of room, like I get down to the bottom here, and I need to move my entire image up, if I try to go over and select my hand tool and click on that right there, I can't do it because I'm in the middle of doing my selection, okay? But I need to move my screen around. I have to zoom in big to see it, and I need to move my screen. If I hold down my space bar, this allows me to get the hand tool, move the screen, and then continue along with my selection. Now you'll notice, I'm going to back up here, I'm going to hit the escape key, which is a way to get out of this. I'm going to start with my Polygon lasso tool, and I'm going to begin clicking and landing little points here, and following along with the edge of my apple. Now, you may notice this, and it's like, okay, so, this is drawing a whole bunch of little straight lines, and it is. And people are like, yeah, well, I need this beautiful continuous curve. Well, let me show you this. If I complete my selection, when you are going in and doing a selection, there is no smooth curve, okay? Photoshop is made up of pixels. So when we create a selection around something, as smooth as we make it, it's never smooth. It literally is following squares. You can't select half a pixel. The pixel is either selected or not selected in this case. And you'll see that no matter how smooth we make this here, it is always going to be stair-step because it has to select the entire pixel. Now we don't want really big flat edges on this here. So I'm going to come back in here and start all over again. And I'm going to click and begin my point. And I'm going to create my selection around this object. Now I don't want to do big long lines like this because it now will look like I've chopped off the edge of my apple. So I'm going to do short little sections here. Also, don't move too quickly, because if you go and you start to click very quickly, if you double click, you will complete your selection. It'll go right back to the beginning, and it will go ahead and close your selection. Once your selection is closed, I can't go and open that selection up again and begin to start where I left off. To move this around, all I'm doing is holding down the space bar, which is giving me the hand tool for the time I hold down my space bar. I can click and drag, and I can run around my entire object. Now this is zoomed in very large. I've got it zoomed in probably 1500%. I want to be able to clearly see exactly where the edge of my apple is with the background, or whatever subject matter you're selecting. And as I go through, I keep working, and then all of a sudden, you know, like the phone rings and I click over here and I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And I've just gone in and I've started clicking off here. I call this the spider web effect, like when you walk through a spider web and you're like, get it off me, get it off me. Well, don't worry about this. Let go of your mouse, okay? Just chill out, let go of your mouse, and hit the delete key. And every time you hit the delete key, what that's going to do is it's going to back up to your last little, as I call it, your last little crumb that you dropped, your last little connecting point right there. So if you do go off the edge right there, don't worry about it, okay? Just stop, let go, hit the delete key a few times, get rid of any of those stray points. And it does happen, you know, your mouse gets caught up on something and it kind of jumps and it isn't what you wanted it to do. Don't worry about it. You know, you go off here, okay, hit delete, okay? Don't hit escape. If you hit escape, it's going to complete the selection, okay? This is one time you don't want to hit escape. So the Polygon Lasso tool is great. It's all you. You just have to follow that edge here. Photoshop isn't going to help you find that edge. And I keep moving around the entire thing, holding the space bar down to get the hand tool, and completing this. I'm going to speed this up a little bit, and it may not be perfect, but you get the idea of how we're going to use this tool. The more you use this, the more you're going to get comfortable with this as well. So I'm getting close back to my origination point here where I started, and I'm going to come back around and find that edge, space bar for the hand tool, come back around here, complete this. Boy, it's a long way around this apple. There it is. We're getting close, folks. I know we are. I know we started down here. And I'm also curious, too, if people are left-handed and they go around their objects counterclockwise or right-handed and go around it clockwise. Now, when you cut back to this original point, you can double-click right here and it's going to connect, or you can watch your cursor here and you can see that little circle showing you that you will connect that back to that original point. Once you do, you get your marching ants, okay? I'm going to zoom back out again so I can see there's my selection, okay? Now, with my selection, I can now isolate this, I can get rid of the background, I can do any other stuff that I want to because my selection's there. Now, what's not uncommon is once you get a selection here, people are happy clickers. Like they'll click over here and then all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, my selection's gone, okay? Well, every time you click outside a selection, it thinks you're starting a new selection and you lose your old selection. I'm gonna hit the escape key and it's gonna come back. But what happens if I choose, I try to do something else, or for some reason I click off my selection? Well, if I click off my selection, I can always go back under the select menu and choose reselect. Now this will only reselect the last selection that I had made, okay? There it is. So if I ever do lose that, great. Now with this selection, if I'd like to do something with it, I can. I could then copy my apple, because it's inside my selection, and put it into another document. I can get rid of the background here if I want to. I can scale this apple in size, or I could change the color without changing the background. if I wanted to delete the background of this apple, I would have to turn this layer into an actual layer. And this is a very common issue. So I've got my selection around my apple, and I open up my layers panel, go under window and choose layers. And if I tried to delete my apple or delete the background, when I hit my delete key, it pulls up this fill box. And it's like, I hit the delete key, why won't it delete? This is a very common problem. When you have an image that you shoot, or a stock image or something, it's basically a flat image. And it shows up that way in the layers panel as the background, and it's locked. Now, there's nothing special about the background. This is just telling you that it's not a layer. And if it's a layer, you can move it, you can scale it, you can delete the background, none of which you can do when it's the background. So I just need to turn this into a layer. So go over to your background, click on the lock, and it turns it into a layer. Once we turn it into a layer, we can now do anything. Get rid of the background, move the apple, change anything that we want to, and it's all good. Now, because everything that's inside of our selection is what we can affect, everything outside is left untouched, if I were to hit delete, I would delete my entire apple. Whoops. Thank goodness for undo. Okay. Now, if I want to get my background selected, I'm going to go under my select menu. I'm going to choose inverse because I want to select the inverse or the opposite, and it's going to select the entire background. Now, this may look like we have two selections going on. We don't. We actually have one selection. It's the background. Now, we look like we have two sets of marching ants, and that's because we have our background selected, but we don't have our apple selected. And this is where things get confusing. If I zoom in and I look at this, it's very clear that it looks like my apple is selected. But remember, if the selection tool looks normal, like it does now, you are not inside your selection. If your selection tool looks like the white cursor with a little selection icon to the lower right, you are inside your selection. Just because we've zoomed in big and we can't see the entire selection here, this is how you tell what is and isn't selected. I'm going to zoom back out. So we don't have two things selected, we just have the background. Now that we've turned this into a layer, and now that we have our selection active, I can hit delete. And then I get a transparent background. I've deleted all those pixels. Now, when we're done with this, you have to turn off the selection. Because if I don't turn off the selection, I can only do things inside the selection. So go into the select menu, choose deselect right here, Command D. This is something that you always have to do instinctively. It's just like when you go into a room, you turn on the light switch. When you leave the room, turn it off. When you're done with selections, turn off that selection. Deselect it. Make sure that that is turned off. Okay? So now we have our apple selected right here. Now if I go to my Move tool, which is the letter V, I can now move this apple all around, and I can transform it as well using my Command T and do whatever I want to with this. And I can also take this and I can put this into other images as well if I'd like. And cool way of getting this into another image here is if I'm going to run through my full screen mode, which is the letter F, which allows me to cycle through my full screen modes here. Standard screen, which is what you see with all our tabs. Full screen mode, which is what I was working in. And then full screen mode with just a black background. If I would like to get my apple into one of my other files here, like this plate, once I've got this apple, I can take my Move tool, I can drag that up to my plate and wait for that to come up, drag my cursor back down in, and my apple comes in all by itself, just the apple. Okay? So that's a great way of doing that. Now I'm going to jump back here a few steps here, and I'm going to show you what we can do. I'm going to back up a few steps here and get my selection back where we were a couple steps ago. Now, when we have our selection around our apple, and we have any of our selection tools active, you see I can click on that selection and I can move that selection all around. Okay? Not something that I would normally want to do, but I can. Now, what happens every once in a while is people will say, you know what, but my cursor doesn't have the little selection here. It's got scissors. Well, the reason why it has scissors is because you have your selection active and you've switched over to your Move tool. When you switch over to your Move tool, you are now not going to move the selection. You are going to move what is selected. And you are literally going to cut that selected area out, which is great. So if I wanted to cut that selected area out and then bring it to another image, I could do this as well because whatever inside my selection is what is affected. So with this, I can move it around if I have my selection tool, or I can cut it if I have my move tool, or I can use my select inverse by going under the select inverse, which is Shift Command I, and on my layer, I can delete that background and then make sure I deselect using my select menu, deselect, which is Command D, and now my selection's off. Now if I'd like to move this around, I do need the move tool because I no longer have a selection active. So let's jump over to the strawberries here, and I want to talk about going in and using the basic lasso tools here with the strawberries. Okay. The third lasso tool that we have, and we will be going back to the original lasso tool, the third lasso tool that we have is the magnetic lasso tool. Now, I could very easily go in here with my Polygon lasso tool and just kind of bop all around here and do this. But I'm going to show you what the magnetic lasso tool does. And the magnetic lasso tool offers some help from Photoshop. So it's not just you trying to go through and get around these strawberries. If you have a complex selection and you don't feel super comfortable about creating a selection, the magnetic lasso tool may be the one for you. But the magnetic lasso tool also has more settings that you have to set in order for it to work. So let's talk about those. Same as the lasso and the Polygon lasso tool, we have our new selection, set the feather to 0. We want anti-aliasing turned on. But now we have width, contrast, and frequency. And even though you have tool hints that come up over each one of these, it doesn't really tell you what's going on. So the width is how close do you intend to stay to the edge of your object? Okay? If you have a width of 10 pixels, that means that your image is really small and you're just guessing. You haven't zoomed in. So I'm going to say a width of 2 pixels, which means I'm going to be pretty precise, and then it's going to help me within those 2 pixels. The contrast is how much contrast do you have between your object and the background? Here, we've got lots of contrast. Okay? If we have, a gray something on a gray background, and we have very little separation between the object and the background, we have very little contrast. So high contrast, we set a high number. Okay? It goes from 0 to 100. How much is it? I'm going to do 90% because that's a high number. Okay? So how much contrast is existing? We're going to go ahead and dial that in. The frequency is how many little breadcrumbs we're going to drop along the way. And let me show you what a breadcrumb is. If I zoom in here and I begin to go along here, I'm going to click to start, and then I'm going to go along here, and you can see I'm just dragging my cursor along. I'm not clicking, and it's dropping those little breadcrumbs. That's the frequency. How frequent do you want those little breadcrumbs to be dropped? Okay, great. So we go along. Now keep in mind that this looks a little bit jagged right here. This is a lower resolution file, so we're seeing a lot more coarse pixelization. But keep in mind too that, we have to select pixels. So we can't go in and make it super smooth like it appears on screen because it has to select the pixels. Now I can move all around here. And of course I could use my hand tool at any time by holding down the space bar and moving and just kind of tracing along. Now, sometimes you get into these little crevices here, and it doesn't want to land a point. Well, if you keep going back and forth and it doesn't want to land a point, just simply click, okay? Just one click, and you can land a point where you want it. So this can be fully automatic, but you can also have some sort of engagement as well as you go around these shapes too. So if it's not quite doing what you want, click on there. You can click here too. You can go around, and you can click when you get to the corners if you want to, okay? Go around, do all that, and you can put a selection around your entire object. And we could go and run around this whole thing doing this. I'm going to do this fairly quickly, not paying a lot of attention to getting the super perfect detail here, but I just want to show you what goes on. Same with the Polygon lasso tool. If you do stray from there, you can go ahead and hit your delete key and bring it back to where you want it to be, and then just go along as well so that you don't have to worry about what's going on. Hold down your space bar to get your hand tool. Let's zoom around here and get this all back together here. Land a point right there because I got a change of direction. Come back up here and complete the entire thing. There it is. Fantastic. Okay, there's my selection. Now, with this selection, I want to select the other strawberries. Now, you are not limited to using that selection tool that you started with. You can use any combination of selection tools. So just because I use the magnetic lasso tool on this one doesn't mean I have to use the magnetic lasso tool on everything else. In fact, I'm going to switch over to my Polygon lasso tool, and I'm going to start putting a selection around this strawberry. However, guess what happens when you click outside your selection? You lose your initial selection because it thinks you're starting over. So I'm going to hit the escape key here. And what I want to do is I would like to add to my selection. I don't want to lose this. I want to add to it. And this selection doesn't have to be touching. It could be a totally separate area over here. So what I'm going to do to add to it, I'm going to hold down my Shift key. And you'll notice when I hold down the Shift key with any of my selection tools, you're going to get that plus that comes off the side. And that says keep my existing selection and add to this selection here so I don't lose it. Once I start my selection after I've held down the Shift key, once I start, I no longer have to hold down the Shift key. All I have to do is start, and then I can run over here and I can create the selection here. And I'm purposely going to kind of go outside a little bit, and I didn't catch it soon enough, but I'm just going to run around this selection really quick. You don't need to watch me do a perfect selection, but I can. And I'm going to complete this selection, but I'm going to do a very poor job of it, and I'm going to clean it up afterwards. I'm going to show you why I'm doing this, okay? Normally, I would try to do the best selection I possibly could, but I want to show you how to add to and subtract from existing selections. So I complete this selection here. I still got that little plus right there saying it's adding to the selection. You'll notice the selection on the left is still active and selected. There we go, okay? So now it is. There's my two selections. Now, I notice that I've gone outside here and I would like to take away from the selection. Well, I'm going to jump over to just my normal lasso tool here because the normal lasso tool is great for these small little areas. And the way I go ahead and I teach adding to and subtracting from selections here is try to make it as simple and as relatable to real world stuff as possible. So I have too much selected here and I want to get rid of it. If I hold down my Option or my Alt key, that's going to subtract. Shift is going to add. Well, clearly I don't want to add to this selection. I want to take this away. So if this were something on a piece of paper and you wanted to show somebody, this is what I want to get rid of, you would come in and say, remove this. Well, that same thinking is what we're going to do with our lasso tool. I'm going to hold down the Option or the Alt key, and I'm just going to come in here and say, remove all of this, okay? And then just go all the way on around. That's what we're going to remove, okay? And that selection goes away. Great. Maybe I want to add to this right here where I don't have these pixels. So I'm going to hold down my Shift key. My selection's in here. How do I know? If the tool looks normal, I am outside my selection. If the tool looks like this with the white cursor and the selection icon, I'm inside. I'm going to hold down my Shift key and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to circle that little area saying add that to it. Here I realize, just held down my space bar to get the hand tool, I want to go ahead and I want to take this selection away because this is all selected. I'm going to hold down my Option key. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say take this away, come back all the way out there, include that whole area, and that's taken away. Let's zoom back out here and see what we have. Looking pretty good. I did notice over here on this one, this little area needs to be taken away, okay? Because this was like where the leaves show through. If I were going to put this on a transparent background, I would want this hole. So I'm going to hold down my Option or Alt key to subtract, and I don't want this to be part of the selection right there, okay? Now it shows up as a selection, and this is where it gets confusing. It's like, okay, is that selected or not? If the tool looks normal, you are outside your selection. If the tool looks like the white cursor, you're inside. This is how you know. So I can use any type of selection tool to add to and subtract from the selection. Lasso tool is great for fine little details, really quick going in and just cleaning up little bits and pieces here. I like that, very freeform. Polygon lasso tool, if I'm going in and I want to hold down my Shift key and I want to go over that edge again and include a large area here. I wouldn't use the magnetic lasso tool to add to and subtract from things because it's always going to try to snap to it. I'd rather use the lasso tool or the Polygon lasso tool because I have a little bit more control. It's less automated. So here, if I wanted to get rid of this little edge here, hold down the Option or Alt key, get my subtract, run over that area that I want to have, and bring that right back there. Okay, so now I've been able to go in and add to and subtract from selections. I've got multiple selections available and going through and using the lasso tools. I'm going to jump back to the apple really quick because there's one cool trick with using the lasso and the Polygon lasso tool, and I like this. It's not something that I use very often, but boy, when I need it, it's great. If I wanted to go in and just isolate the stem of this apple really quick, because I want to just change the color of the stem itself. If I start off with a Polygon lasso tool, and I start going around this, maybe I get to the point where I don't want to keep creating all these straight lines. I'd like to just kind of run over this really smoothly. If I go in and I hold down my Option or my Alt key while I am in the middle of a selection, when I hold this down and then I click and I begin to move, you'll notice that my Polygon lasso tool will now change to my lasso tool, okay? And if I then let go of my Option key and let go of my mouse, it goes back to my standard Polygon lasso tool, okay? But if I hold down Option, it doesn't actually change the cursor until I actually Option or Alt click, and then once I start moving, it changes it over to the freeform lasso tool while I'm doing this, okay? And then I can let go of both the mouse and the Option or Alt key, get back to my Polygon lasso tool. So hold down the Option or Alt, nothing happens here until I begin to move, and then at any point I can let go of both, and then go back to my Polygon lasso tool like that. So I kind of like that feature, so it's two tools built into one. It's kind of an obscure little trick right there because you wouldn't know that the lasso tool comes up by holding down the Option or Alt till you hold that down, and then you actually begin to draw. And there's my selection around the stem if I wanted to slightly change the color or modify or do something with that in there. So that was just a really quick overview of those three lasso tools and how to use them. Subsequent videos are going to get more into selections here, but if you've ever wondered how the lasso tools actually work, Polygon, Magnetic, and Freeform Lasso tool, that's how they work.